Hello and welcome to our pre-recorded webinar titled Considerations for NextUp Program Implementation. My name is Linda Ramos. I am the Higher Education Program Manager with John Burden Advocates for Youth. And we are very excited today to have this collection of experts to share their insights and knowledge regarding NextUp implementation. And so with that, wanting to try and share a little bit more about initially just the goals of this particular webinar. Our goals for this webinar include providing strategies and insights for program integration of NextUp and existing foster youth support programs. We also plan to explore opportunities to leverage funding streams to expand infrastructure and services for foster youth. And we want to identify opportunities to improve the frequency and quality of services for current and former foster youth attending community college. Now, with that, I'd like to have an opportunity for our panelists to introduce themselves. We are very lucky today to be joined by a number of practitioners and experts in this field. And so I'm going to start with Dr. Alex Ojeda and hope that you can take a moment to introduce yourself.
Of course, thank you, Linda. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Alex Ojeda. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the coordinator of NextUp and Guardian Scholars over at Los Angeles Valley College, which is situated on Tatavium land in the San Fernando Valley. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alvaro Aguila. I am a student service specialist, and I coordinate the Foster and Kinship Care Education, NextUp, and Guardian Scholar programs at Los Angeles City College.
Hello, my name's Nikki Dixon Harrison. I serve as the Associate Dean at Los Angeles City College, overseeing the EOPS Care Foster Youth Programs, Resources for Success, which is Basic Needs, and UMOJA. I will add that I have been working with the NextUp. Prior to that, it was known as KFES since the original implementation back in 2015.
Thank you all. Hello, I'm Flo Charlie, faculty counselor serving the NextUp and the Guardian Scholars student scholars here at Sierra College, which is located in Rocklin, California.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And so with that, we're going to present a number of questions today to our panelists. And so we wanted to kind of work through some of those questions, but more in a conversation format. So we did want to provide the questions to our audience so you know what topics will be covered. But in terms of the panel presentation itself, we're just going to go ahead and have a conversation and hope that you know, the questions and information presented here address some of the topics and maybe items of priority for your particular campus as you're working towards NextUp expansion and integration. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing our screen, and we'll be moving more towards sorry about that. But we'll be moving more towards the first question, which includes what factors did you consider when you decided to have a single integrated program for foster youth? And how does your program design reflect a trauma-informed approach to services? Does anybody want to start with that question?
I can begin. At our college, the primary approach that we had was the student experience. We wanted to ensure that students had a streamlined experience in receiving foster youth services from our college. And originally, we did have a number of different foster youth programs. We had the Guardian Scholars, which had its own faculty coordinator. We had the NextUp program, which had its own faculty coordinator. And through a reorganization at our college, it was decided that it would be more effective and it would be in the best interest of students to have a more streamlined approach to providing services. So it was through a reorganization within our student services division under the leadership of our vice president. And through that reorganization, the foster youth programs was put under one coordinator. And that one coordinator is now responsible for coordinating all of the services for all foster youth. So that includes the Guardian Scholars Program. It includes our EOPS NextUp program. So now there's just one program coordinator, which is a classified staff position. To support that, we also have faculty. So we have a faculty counselor to support our Guardian Scholars Program, and a faculty counselor to support our NextUp program, who is also an EOPS counselor. And so you can see with that program design, it has allowed us to be much more intentional and much more integrated with our services for foster youth, so that when students experience us, they just experience one program, not go here, not go there. It's very centralized, it's very streamlined. Our college most recently, a little over a year ago, took it a step further and created an associate dean position, which was new to our college. So now, we have an associate dean that is overseeing, EOPS care foster youth programs. And we also have foster kinship care education program as part of that. So it has just really allowed us to be very effective in the implementation of services to students, very streamlined, very intentional, so that when students experience our services, it's one single point of contact. They don't have to go to various, entities across the campus, which can be very confusing. And it's not an ideal format to serve students, especially foster youth, who are already coming from a very broken system, coming from various county agencies. So that is definitely something to consider, is the organization at your respective college. And that will require leadership, that will require the support of the vice president, the president, and your dean, to really take that bold and courageous leadership to have a centralized way in which you can deliver services to students.
Thank you, Nikki. That I think having that top-down vision, right, of how from the institutional leadership all the way through to who is providing those services and how students experience that is really critical. Who else wants to maybe talk or speak into this question in terms of the considerations you took in creating a single integrated program, or maybe focusing on how the design really is reflecting a trauma-informed approach?
Yeah, I would like to add just a little bit to what Dean Nikki mentioned about how intentional LACC was with integrating everything under one coordinator and under one associate dean. So the idea really was to create a foster youth pipeline, or a pipeline of services that will start with our caregivers through foster and kinship care education. And by providing that continuing education for our resource parents, that information will trickle down into our current or future Guardian Scholar and NextUp students. So as a coordinator for all three programs, I'm really able to align the vision for the three programs. So this is a consideration for those colleges that also have foster and kinship care education. As you're considering this reorganization, it works because we're able to really leverage the resources from each program, make sure that we're all moving in one direction within foster and kinship care education, Guardian Scholars, and NextUp, and to provide a seamless connection really for our community and for the students that we have currently enrolled. And understanding the unique challenges of our foster youth, we're also very intentional with how we're combining the experience through Guardian Scholars and NextUp. So making sure that we're removing barriers for students who are coming in. And we're doing that by integrating applications, by making sure that students have access to services that are consistent within the programs, regardless of the program that they're in.
Thank you, Alvaro.
Yeah, definitely echo both Dean Nikki and Dr. or Alvaro. Here at Sierra College, we went through those same transitions of having two separate coordinators for Guardian Scholars and foster youth, and then the EOPS and NextUp, and then merging the two. So I transitioned to myself, who was previously the coordinator for foster youth services, So now we have a director who oversees all of these programs, which are TRIO, CalWorks, EOPS, NextUp, CARE, and NGSP. And that's where we're at now. Some of the things and approaches that we looked at, especially around trauma-informed, is to be housed and co-located in one space, so that there's a central, like, Dean Nikki mentioned, is a centralized place. There's only one entryway in. Students don't know what programs they belong in really when they walk into our doors. They just know who they're there to see. And we also have our own financial aid technician. I know that financial aid has several times come up in studies as one of the barriers for our students and their accomplishments. And so when we looked at the way we structure our programs and staffing of our programs, that is one position that we advocated for, is to have a dedicated financial aid technician to serve our foster youth from the very beginning to the very end when they're done with Sierra College. And so that person is also housed here in our office space. They're literally a few steps away from my door. And tutoring is also housed here. So again, students, creating that experience of continuity and seamless, right? We have students who qualify for different things. They qualify for CalWorks. Some students don't qualify at all for any of these services due to age and care or adoption or other things, but they're all served in one space. They have a single counselor, myself. Initially, we had EOPS students seeing EOPS counselors, and those who didn't qualify for whatever reason were seeing myself. There was a sour patch where students had a hard time connecting with me because they've already built a relationship with their EOPS counselor. So we had those conversations, myself and the coordinator at the time, as well as the EOPS counselors who were serving the foster youth students, to figure out a way that we could work together to have their counseling meetings be counted. For me, my meetings with the students counted for their required meetings. And that is what really opened up the doors for a lot of our students. There was a high attrition rate at the time. Students were, not continuing in EOPS for not meeting the contract. And so, but they were having a hard time connecting with me as a counselor outside of EOPS. And so we talked about that, and that was one of the biggest transitions that we did together as a team with the EOPS team, is to have myself serve for all fosters, regardless if they're EOPS or not. And I think that's another biggie, especially when we look at these students and approaching it from a trauma-informed practice.
Thank you for mentioning it. I think those relationships are really something that we know, according to research, are so fundamental to the success of foster youth. And so being conscientious of how those relationships can evolve and be consistent over time is really important. Any thoughts, Dr. Ojeda, on this?
Definitely. Yeah, thank you, Linda. Definitely. And I think, everyone, Nikki, Alvaro, and Flo hit really great points, and I think the intention and the streamlining and removing barriers are so important. And one of the reasons why we decided to keep NextUp and Guardian Scholars under the roof of EOPS was for that reason, to minimize barriers, to have everything in a single application so that students are not bounced around to different offices, as Nikki mentioned, because not only can that be confusing, as Nikki just mentioned, but also discouraging. And I think that also includes some of that trauma-informed approach and having these types of intentions, because, coming from different offices, different, state sanctioned offices or county offices or court or legal offices, there's a lot of that bouncing around, a lot of, go see that person, or, sending, you need to go down the hall, or you need to go to this other building downtown. And it's discouraging for our students. So one of the things that we do here is to make sure that everything is centralized, as some of you already mentioned, and making sure that we provide a welcoming environment. So we heavily train our front desk staff, which are primarily student workers, to have that type of welcoming approach, the kind that are, I think, goes a really long way in terms of longevity. And I think, Flo, you brought up a good point too, in terms of those connections that students make, because y'all know just as well as I do that as soon as a student feels that negative vibe, there's a good chance that they're not going to come back. And that's just from their experience in the foster care system for a lot of our students. And having that trauma informed approach is so important, because minimizing barriers, I think, as Alvaro mentioned, is so important for our students, because as soon as they hit that roadblock, as soon as they feel that they're not going to get to that next phase, there's a good chance that they're not going to come back. So I think we here at LA Valley College, we really make it a point to make sure that students are getting everything that they need under one roof. And just a small example before we transition to the next question. Yesterday, we had a brand new student come in for his very first time at LA Valley College, is in transitional housing, is an AB-12 extended foster care student, and it was his very first time at LA Valley College. And as soon as he got done applying for the college at admissions and records, he asked, is there any help I could get being a foster youth? And one of the things that I think reaped a lot of benefits, and working with a lot of our offices on campus, admissions and records, financial aid, the person said, you need to go see Alex upstairs. So he walked into our office and he's like, I'm looking for Alex. And as soon as we made that connection, I realized how beneficial it was to make those connections with admissions and records, financial aid, our welcome center across the entire campus, because then they know exactly where that student needs to go, instead of sending them off into a scavenger hunt, handing them a campus map and saying, okay, good luck, you need to find this person. So I think really having those relationships, those connections with other folks on campus, those cross-departmental relationships are so important, so that other folks on campus know what you're doing and know the type of students that we serve, because we have a very specific population that have very specific experiences, and we know that one negative experience on campus could very well be that reason they don't come back. So having that informed approach regarding some of these students' backgrounds is so important for our college here, especially when we're trying to get students through the doors and enrolled in our programs. So I think everyone here really brought up a lot of good points, and we try to reflect that same intention. I think is what it is here at LA Valley College.
Thank you, Dr. Ojeda. And I know many of you will have a chance in a future question to talk a little bit more about the outreach and inreach. So thank you for bringing that up. We will have a chance to elaborate more on that and get more insights. When you started answering this question in terms of, again, what factors you considered, there was a lot, it seems, of conversation around staffing structure. I think, Dean Harrison mentioned it, Flo, you mentioned it, in terms of what combination of skills and positions you needed to really be the most effective. And again, keeping in mind that streamlined services approach for foster youth. So as folks mentioned, folks aren't going on a scavenger hunt, right, for these different services and approaches. So can you give us a little bit more insight on, maybe across your programs, what your staffing structure looks like? I know, Dean Harrison, you started to speak on this a little bit already, but maybe also in this, and I know we didn't discuss this, but maybe what qualities you look for in that staff, because it sounds like that's as much a critical part of finding the right person for these positions as having the position itself. So with that, whoever wants to launch us into that conversation.
Yes, thank you, Linda, and thank you to the panelists. I'm getting energized just hearing your comments, so I have to restrain myself. But I will definitely add to the point Alex was raising, which does lead into the next question about your staffing structure, is how critical it is, especially for new programs that are taking on NextUp for the first time, to build trust with their students. That is critical. It's critical to the success of your program long term. And part of that trust is having consistency, having a consistent staffing structure, consistent staff, consistent faculty, and consistent leadership. I will reflect on our program here at City College. One of the successes of our program, and that is within our Guardian Scholars program, is having the same staff that have been connected with this program upwards of 10 years. So that we have foster youth who have come and gone. And that is a pattern that you will see. Students may need to take a step back and return back to the college. But when they come back, they're saying the same faces. It's not a different person every time they come, every semester. So being very intentional about the identification of your faculty, of your staff, and your hourly workers, and your interns. making sure that these individuals are reflective of the communities that they're serving. One of the things that we have integrated within our programs that has been very successful is hiring MSW interns. So at our college, we have partnerships with CSU Dominguez Hills, where they will send us a MSW intern. So these interns have a very unique skill set beyond just counseling. So in working with foster youth, it's more than just getting an ed plan done. I mean, some of these counseling appointments can be upwards of 60, even 80 minutes long or longer, depending on all the various needs that are going to come up within that counseling appointment that are beyond just you know your standard educational plan. And so having individuals, so Linda, to your question about the skill set, so having individuals that have a broad skill set about services, about county services, city services, local services, and the cooperation of these services, that's where NextUp is so critical. We are required to support students in the cooperation of services from all of these different agencies so that students aren't left to do this alone. And so that is a critical role of NextUp, is to assist with that. And that's what the original name of CAFES was, cooperating. But to the point of staffing, one skill set that is critical is that of social workers. And so we have been very successful at our college to hire MSW interns from CSU Dominguez Hills, as I mentioned earlier, but also from USC. So I say that, to encourage and invite universities and colleges to work in collaboration. Work in collaboration with your local 4 years, public and private, that have MSW programs, and cultivate that partnership so you can have interns working in your office. Also in hiring faculty at my previous college and selecting faculty, both of the NextUp counselors had MSW masters. Rather than a counseling degree, I was looking for individuals that had a skill set in social work. And I was very successful in hiring and identifying 2 counselors who had an MSW. So that is a critical skill set you may want to look for in hiring a EOPS NextUp counselor to support your program.
Thank you. And I saw everybody vigorously nodding in terms of all the different topics that come up during those, what would be academic counseling sessions. But again, you nailed it when you said, like, there's just so much, right, that really is uplifted in those conversations that folks need to be prepared in a way to help students navigate those resources and connect students with those. But who else would like to speak on this topic?
I'm just smiling from ear to ear because I am an MSW. So I'm just like, yeah. Yeah, I think everything that Nikki mentioned is actually spot on. We had a few changes within our programs. And so some of our new hires have never worked with this population before. And luckily, COVID lifted some of these restrictions that we had. So Blueprint and JBay hosted an event, and I invited our new staff to participate, because in these events, you will be exposed to the stories told by students, told by professionals who serve these populations. And the staff member who attended with me, brand new, eyes wide open. She was like, I am so thankful I came, because I never knew. I never know. Now I get to hear from students themselves. I get to hear these stories from students in the foster care system currently. And so I think, to me, having that exposure, having that knowledge of the system that these young individuals or even the older ones that are returning back to school have dealt with, what lived through, right? So just a little bit of hint of that, what was that like for them, and understanding that system will help these students navigate. A lot of times we have students coming and applying, they don't have their foster care verification. We can't find them on the CSAC. And so to help a student advocate and navigate that, to obtain that document, can be, a barrier without you knowing, where do you go? Who do you contact? And so it's important to have these types of trainings for the community college systems and the universities too, because some of these staff members don't have that experience and have never been in those systems and never experienced those systems. So to me, that's important. Exactly the resources available to foster youth students, understanding resources available to students on campus and off campus. That is critical. Housing has been a challenge. So again, understanding and figuring out our staff. One of the things that was a challenge, and I've heard this as we were integrating NextUp, is that a lot of the colleges did not have full-time staff to serve foster youth. Rather, it was financial aid, a counselor, a staff member, right? Classified staff member. That was lacking. And I think some of the challenges that students were told us is that we show up, but they're not there. We have to come back the next day. You know what I mean? And so that for us was important. When we started the Guardian Scholars Program, that was one of the things that we advocated for. Full-time committed faculty members to serve as a counselor and as a classified staff, to be here regardless of what time or day that the students come, right? If they come on Monday, somebody is there. If they come on Tuesday, someone is there. And so that wasn't critical to us. And then again, the financial aid. So in our programs now, we have what I mentioned earlier, a director. We have a full-time counselor. We also have a part-time counselor. We have a classified counseling assistant. So this person meets with the students in between my meetings with students, and their job is really to touch bases with students. How are you? Are you drinking? Are you eating? Do you have food? You know, do you need any resources? And then if anything needs to be elevated to me as a counselor, she will do that. And then our last one is a full-time financial aid technician to serve our foster youth. So that's the staffing structure right now. We're all just one team, regardless if our foster youth are in the EOPS, if they're in the NextUp, they're in CalWorks, they all come to the same team.
And one thing I think might be helpful for folks to understand too, as you're sharing this information, is how many students you're serving in your program, just to give an idea of if I have a full-time counselor and a part-time counselor, how many students does that serve? And what considerations should we take in terms of, again, hiring for those intensive and frequent touch points with students?
Okay. So in terms of foster youth, we have over 500 that have identified themselves as former foster youth. Currently, we have a little under 200 or around 200 that are verified foster youth. Currently served in our programs, regardless of Guardian Scholars, all the way to the NextUp programs, we have a 150. And that's with COVID times. We had more, but with COVID times, we're at about 150.
Thank you.
Yeah, similarly at LA Valley College, we have a very diverse staff, small yet mighty staff, starting with our Dean of Special Programs, Dr. Sherry Rodriguez, myself as the coordinator. We have a full-time counselor who sees all of our NextUp Guardian Scholars as well as EOPS students. We have a student services assistant who helps us on the clerical end, making sure that our students are identified as correctly on financial aid and all of the applications and so forth. We also have a UPI, or an unclassified paid intern, who is a former EOPS student now working on his bachelor's degree at Cal State Northridge. So we tend to hire, students who have already been through our programs. We also have a student worker who's a current NextUp student as well. So we definitely like to hire students who have been in the program and who know the barriers, know the challenges, and also know the benefits of these programs, so they could help students even better. And then as Nikki mentioned, we also have an MSW intern from Cal State Northridge. We partnered up with Cal State Northridge's MSW program since the very beginning as a trial to see if it would work. And as Nikki mentioned, the benefits of having an MSW intern are monumental. Even though we only have our intern Xavier Tuesdays and Thursdays, he is employed by the Department of Child and Family Services, which is also part of the CalSWEC program at Cal State Northridge, which specifically works with the DCFS in helping them through their MSW program. So in solidifying this relationship with the MSW department at Cal State Northridge, it has been very helpful because students sometimes just need to do a quick check-in, ask a quick question if a counselor is in a meeting, or if I'm busy, or if our SSA has something going on, the intern is always available, or our UPI is always available. So as Flo mentioned, it's super important to always have someone there throughout the whole week, Monday through Friday. Someone's always available to answer questions specifically about NextUp and Guardian Scholars. And we also have an FYSI liaison in financial aid. So we have somebody in financial aid who directly works with our students who have been identified. And currently we have about 400 self-identified foster youth at LA Valley College, and we serve about maybe 120 of those actively this semester. But as Flo mentioned again, our pre-pandemic numbers were a little bit higher, but we're steadily increasing our numbers back to pre-pandemic levels. And just this last fall semester, we had a huge influx of students applying to LA Valley College, and a big percentage was current or former foster youth. So we've noticed our numbers steadily increasing last fall and also this spring too. So I think hiring folks, I think with that commitment, and I think somebody mentioned that a lot of folks going into this work have no previous knowledge working with this population. But I think being involved in all of the different workshops we do, all of the trainings, that we provide on campus for our faculty, staff, administrators, it's kind of like working on the job, learning on the job, and really, picking up some of those things that are very unique, and those nuances that come with doing this specific type of work. You tend to pick those up, kind of like offering students a bottle of water when they get in, offering them a snack, as soon as they walk into your office. That's something that's not common across the campus. So, really, embracing those small little details in terms of staffing, I think is really, really important to consider for those new campuses who are getting the NextUp program.
Thank you. So, Alvaro, did you have any additional insights? Want to make sure.
When I started with the programs, I was not only new to LACC, but I was completely new to Guardian Scholars and to NextUp. So I just want to speak to some of those programs that are going to be, starting fresh, maybe some of the new faculty or staff that maybe haven't worked with this population or Guardian Scholars and NextUp in specific. Just like Flo and Alex mentioned, how important it is to really use and leverage the resources that are already out there and the people that are out there. I think it was like my first week when I transitioned to Guardian Scholars and NextUp, I went to a conference and Alex was a presenter. And I think like the day after I emailed him, I was like, hey, I'm new to Guardian Scholars. I just wanted to reach out and connect. And that's one of the things that really has helped me as I started growing into my position and, learning about the community, was how helpful everyone is and how much expertise there is in this community. So really leveraging opportunities for workshops, for conferences, reaching out to folks. Everyone that I've reached out to has been extremely open and helpful as well. So just know that nothing needs to be built from scratch. NextUp and Guardian Scholars has, they've been around for years. So there's a whole, a whole level of expertise and a whole set of resources out there for anyone who is just starting with these programs at the colleges. So, really use that, and, don't be afraid to reach out to the community.
Kind of modeling, right, the behavior we want to see in our students as well. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. Our next question is looking at how do you blend funding sources? We talked about some of the different positions and we started to touch on a little bit of the services, but how do you blend these different funding sources to really offer, again, a single program that all foster youth can access? Because it sounds like across your campuses, you're serving not only students who are eligible for NextUp who were in care at age 13 and over, but also maybe students who were in care at any time. And so I just wanted to inquire with this particular panel, how do you do that? How do you leverage these different funding sources to be able to stretch those services across the entire foster youth population?
But we've been successful at Los Angeles City College of blending a number of funding sources to provide seamless services to our foster youth, beginning with, of course, NextUp funding, but pairing that with EOPS funding, pairing that with foster kinship, FKCE, foster kinship education funding, and pairing that with the support of our foundation. So we are very fortunate to have a very strong partnership with our foundation and a number of funders that are funding the Guardian Scholars Program so that we can provide services to students who do not qualify for NextUp because of the various reasons. And so with all of the multiple funding streams that we have, we still wanted to be very intentional that when a student came to our center, our foster youth center, we were able to do an intake with that student and assess what services that they needed. But on the back end, we have a number of funding sources that are coming in with, as kind of going back to our structure, we do utilize the support of EOPS to ensure success of our NextUp program. The EOPS has been integral from the day one in the success of our NextUp program. I just wanted to highlight that. So in leveraging our EOPS services, again, I had mentioned we have an EOPS and NextUp counselor that provides services to students. We also pull on our EOPS classified staff who are responsible for the intake. And so they are very critical to the success of our program. So we have received a lot of support from EOPS and to ensure the success of our NextUp program. But I especially want to highlight, especially for EOPS programs that are getting their NextUp program funding for the first time. If you have not done so already, please forge a partnership with your foundation. There is a lot of support out there. A lot of individuals are giving to support the needs of foster youth because the need is great. And so with that foundation funding, it has allowed us to do things that we can't do with categorical funding, which is restricted. So if you have not forged a partnership with your foundation, please do so. And for those campuses that have a relationship, please continue to grow those relationships so that you can expand it.
Yes, I think Dean Nikki mentioned all of the funding. We utilize the same funding sources. Well, I think the only other one, the biggest one that we also receive from, and I have to give props to our admins, is every year they've allocated funding from the C Fund, which is a Student Equity and Achievement Fund, to support all foster youth, regardless if they're a part of the EOPS or the NextUp program or Guardian Scholars, and then regardless of age, right, of care. So the C funding is truly one of our biggest funder, and then our foundation office for students who don't qualify for NextUp in EOPS.
And thank you, Flo, for that reminder. We do receive C funding as well to support all foster youth. Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, very similar to what Nikki and Flo just mentioned. We have a similar kind of framework here when it comes to funding, but also for our Guardian Scholars who don't qualify for NextUp or who don't meet any of the requirements or who were in care in the in the 90s or in the 80s. We do have a specific fund that's provided by the Pritzker Family Foundation, which provides us a grant every year to make sure that we're able to support foster youth who don't qualify for NextUp. So that's been really crucial in being able to support those students that don't qualify for EOPS or NextUp for whatever reason. So that funding stream has been super critical, and also providing scholarships through our foundation. So our foundation does manage the Pritzker fund for us. So we're able to also allocate specifically funding for student scholarships every year through the foundation. So I just want to echo what Nikki mentioned in terms of establishing a relationship with the foundation. If you haven't already, really expand that relationship into supporting current and former foster youth has been really critical for us. And, once students apply for scholarships and the students who receive them, we're able to have a little award ceremony for them and acknowledge all the students who won those, who received those scholarships, pardon me. So, that really goes a long way for students receiving scholarships, and it kind of sets that motivation to continue into the following semester. So that's been really crucial for us too.
Thank you. Working along the same lines as folks were mentioning right now with regard to the blending of different resources and specific sources were mentioned. I know how important it is, right, for students to feel a sense of equity and parity, right, and feeling like I'm being supported. So along the lines too of that conversation with funding, there's sometimes concerns or questions about that issue of parity among student services, especially if some qualify for NextUp, some may not, and what that looks like, what that feels like, and how that's managed, right, for students. So our next question is kind of trying to get a little bit into that kind of that area where we want to name and acknowledge, right? NextUp recipients typically are eligible for more services than maybe students who are not NextUp eligible. So how do you create that cohesion in terms of the program services to make sure students understand what they're eligible for and also have a sense again of that parity and equity in terms of access to those services?
This was one of the big discussions that we had in early 2020 when we decided to combine Guardian Scholars and NextUp under one coordinator, and to prevent the have and the have-nots, right? To prevent that disparity and to create like an identity. So as staff, administrators, faculty, we see the different funding streams, and we see how programs each have their own unique guidelines and things that we have to follow. But the students don't see that. And I think that's what's important. The students see one unique program, one unique family of staff and administrators who are all advocating on their behalf. So what we do at LA City College is we have Guardian Scholars as really the flagship program. That's the overall foster youth program for our students. So every student that comes in are all Guardian Scholars, and those who meet the additional eligibility requirements are part of NextUp. So our students don't really see themselves as part of one program or the other. They really see themselves as Guardian Scholars, and some of the other folks are, NextUp eligible. So we were very intentional with that as we were, creating this, and we made sure that we had forums for our students, that we had welcome backs where we explained the differences. We explained to students in a group and on one-on-one, via one-on-one conversations when they would ask, why it is that we were creating these structures, and just made sure that we were very transparent with the students. As someone who came in that was completely new, replacing a counselor coordinator who had been in the program for several years, there was obviously a lot of hesitation within the students. But it's really just being genuine, really meeting the students where they are, and making sure that we're letting things settle with time, right? As long as us as professionals, do the work, and we have our heart and mindset, where it is, the results will show, and the students will kind of come into that. So we make sure that we utilize our NextUp dollars or NextUp funds to provide that support for our NextUp students. And then, like Alex mentioned, use our foundation fund, the Pritzkers, whatever grants that we have at that time to support our non-NextUp eligible students. So we do have most of our events, I would say, are combined. They're just Guardian Scholar events, and our NextUp students join, obviously, because they're own Guardian Scholars. We do have a couple of smaller, more intimate NextUp only events. But those, we make sure that the way we market them is, to the NextUp students, and we provide some sort of supplemental activity or workshop for the Guardian Scholar students. So from my experience, we haven't really seen students, ask questions, or, why do I not get that? But it's because we've been very hardworking at making sure that we're getting resources for our Guardian Scholar students, and that we're not just being complacent, with the NextUp funds that we have, but making sure that we're writing grants, and that we're talking to stakeholders, and we're in community meetings to get that funding and get those resources for our Guardian Scholar only students, so that us as staff, we're doing our part in meeting the students in the middle, to make sure that we're providing the services that's equal and equitable among all our students, regardless of the age that they were in care or what program they are eligible for.
Anyone else want to jump in on this question?
Yeah, I would have to echo that. But our programs, we have what we call 3 tiers. You have our Guardian Scholars only, we have our Guardian Scholars who are EOPS, and then we have our Guardian Scholars NextUp. And so all 3 of these tiers receive different levels of services. For those who are in the EOPS program, they have a tad bit more resources than students in the Guardian Scholars. So students in Guardian Scholars, of course, our funding is mainly from the C funding. And so those students receive, an example, a book voucher. That's the same as the EOPS, but they would only receive a one-time meal card to eat at our cafeteria for $50, compared to someone in EOPS, they would receive it for $100. And so those are just some of the small differences in terms of resources that each of these tier students receive. And so we actually experienced that, where some of our students like, wait, am I part of NextUp? And how come they're receiving this monthly grants and I'm not, and so in the fall term, we ended up separating. We have a Canvas. We utilize Canvas to communicate to our students the resources, reminders, things like that. And so we actually had to separate out our NextUp scholars from our general Guardian Scholar students, or from our other Guardian Scholar students, because NextUp was receiving a lot of communications from our office about, come pick up, don't forget to pick up this and that. And our other students were like, wait a minute, what about me? And so our programs started separating these communications, and then there were less of that, asks of, wait a minute, do I come in and pick up this $100 gas card or not, And so we separated those out, and all communications go through that. We do host most of our celebrations, all of that are together with our NextUp students, even our college tours. Everyone goes. It's just different fundings are used to pay for specific students, but everyone goes together. When we have celebrations, everyone wears the same, stole, and all of that is, when we have stoles, for example, is paid for from the foundation office, because it's for all foster youth students. But that was one of the things that we started having some challenges with, was the communications I was going mainly for our NextUp students, but our other students were also receiving it through Canvas. So we did have to separate them out. And now we have a Canvas specifically for NextUp only students, and a Canvas specific for other foster youth students. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, those are great points. Our structure here at Valley College is very similar to Sierra's and LA City's. But I just want to kind of elaborate a little bit more on the importance of Alvaro's point and that transparency, because as Flo mentioned, to our students talk amongst each other, and they're like, how much was your grant? How much was yours? And they see the differences between the NextUp grants and the Guardian Scholars grants, of course, because they're 2 different streams of funding. But we try to keep everything together. But when it comes to little situations like that, it is important to send out those announcements separately, as you mentioned, Flo, because students are going to wonder, why they're receiving this and they're not. So that's when Alvaro's point really comes in handy, is when we have our welcome meetup. We call our workshops or meetings meetups. So every month we have a meetup, and in the beginning of every semester we have a welcome meetup where we let students know these are our differences. And we also have the 3 tiers, as you mentioned, Flo, our Guardian Scholars only, our Guardian Scholars EOPS, and then our NextUp, which kind of gets the whole package, right? So we also let students know that too, so that it's transparent, right? This is why you're receiving this, and this is why you're not. But when it comes to field trips, like you mentioned, Flo, the campus tours, our celebrations, we do it all together. We just have to be very careful with the funding, make sure we're not supplanting and things like that. So I think our intention with that is to create that sense of community, right? Because how would it look if we're having a celebration for NextUp students and then another separate one for Guardian Scholars? There's that separation, that sense of separation. So in our intention to create a greater sense of community, we have our celebrations together. And we've also partnered up with other programs, for example, with CARE. every holiday season, we have what's called Care for Kids, where we invite all of our parenting students from NextUp, Guardian Scholars, Care, EOPS, and we have this huge event for all of our parenting students, which again gives them a greater sense of community, knowing that they're not the only students who are, also parenting and have children at home. So, that's really important to consider for those campuses bringing in the NextUp program, is to consider those who don't qualify for NextUp, but yet you also want to create that sense of community for those also who are in Guardian Scholars Only or Guardian Scholars in EOPS. And that's so important. And one last thing I want to mention about that too is the importance of collaborating with other campuses. Alvaro also mentioned, reaching out to other folks, and I'm really lucky to have in close proximity LA Mission College, LA Pierce College, College of the Canyons, and Cal State Northridge, as well as our nearest CSU here in the San Fernando Valley. So we've created the San Fernando Valley Scholars Network. So we take all our field trips together. So we have a multi-campus campus tours around the LA, greater Los Angeles area. So that's been really also critical in helping us, get our students exposed to all of these different resources, whether it's our wellness, self-care, or just informative field trips to let students know about the 4-year transfer process. So all of those things are very critical in establishing that structure, what I call that sense of community, right? Which is, I think, very important for our students.
Thank you all for sharing that. I know that sometimes people can get a little nervous about how that information gets presented, but I really appreciate the focus on, again, the transparency and really working to support students in understanding, right, what the eligibility requirements are or what they can qualify for. But also that recommendation to connect with foundations so that there is that additional effort to secure possible additional sources of funding to support Guardian Scholars who may not be eligible for NextUp. So thank you.
If I could just add one more thing, Linda, for our Guardian Scholar students, what we also do, so important, when we meet with them, we create a checklist and we make sure that they apply for every program they're eligible for. EOP, EOPS, Resources for Success, TRIO. If they're not eligible for NextUp, we know that Guardian Scholars doesn't have everything. We don't have all the resources in the world. So we try to leverage those campus resources as well. So making those internal campus partnerships, making sure that, that we're cool with the other coordinators of the programs, and we make sure that we connect our students to as many programs as possible.
Great point. Thank you for bringing that up. So that kind of leads us into this next question around the student experience. And so if, sharing a little bit, again, we touched on this in the very first question of just that single door of point of entry, and what that experience looks like. We've touched on that again a little bit right now when we're talking about the services and how those are, how students are informed of what services they may be eligible for. But this question also asks folks to think about or to speak to the outreach, inreach, and referral, right? So that students, once they apply to your campus, what does that process looks like to connect them to your services? And then again, in terms of that access of services, whether it's an intake process, an application, what does that look like for students?
Yes, I can go. I think every one of us here knows that student can self-identify in that CCC apply, when they apply to the college. And then also through the FAFSA or the financial aid application, they can indicate. Here at our college, we use especially those 2 applications to get our data or list of students that we can outreach to. And so admissions and records, we have a system, I think Argos is what we use to run numbers, to gather like every information about a student who applied to our college from what term and who indicated their foster youth, regardless of age. And then we use financial aid. We do have a financial aid technician, and that list comes to them, right? So anybody who indicates foster youth in their financial application comes to our financial aid technician. In addition to that, the Chafee application. So when students apply for the Chafee application, our college actually has a roster of those who indicated they're at Sierra College and applied for Chafee. That's another way that we outreach our students. So students who applied and were given that name on the roster, our financial aid office then reaches out to them. It gives them every information, inviting them to our NextUp program and our Guardian Scholars program. Prior to me coming here, the college, Sierra College, had a really close relationship with our community partners. And that relationship has continued on now. We have advisory meetings quarterly with our community partners. And those community partners are our ILP, independent living programs, and the AB-12 programs, as well as the THP and THP Plus. And so we meet, like I said, quarterly. We share information about what changes, the process of getting students in, and they share with us any of their students who are interested in attending Sierra College. We used to host information meetings and sessions where we invite social workers, probation officers to attend with their NILP, THP, to come and bring in their youth, even the K through 12 systems. To take a tour of our campus. We're one of very few in California who has dorms. And so we show students, what the dorms look like. And our dorms, they reserve at least minimum of 10 beds just for foster youth. So our students are not competing with other general student population when applying for the dorms. And so they get to tour that, and then they get to hear what resources we have. So those are some of the efforts that we do to encourage foster youth to apply to Sierra College, and then as well as giving out information. So we get our information through the Chafee roster. The admissions and records will share. Those with the CCC apply, and then the financial aid. Also, those who indicate in their CCC apply application to Sierra College foster youth, they get an automated email that's sent to them, giving them information about the Guardian Scholars with our link to further know more information about us and our contact information. Yeah, if something else comes up, I'll share again.
Those are great. Thank you. That's a great start to the question.
Yeah, I'll go next just because all I want to say is we do exactly what Flo just said. And I think that's really a great way to pull all these, different lists that we can, use to outreach for students. One other thing that we do just in addition to that is we also ask for a list from our institutional effectiveness office, just in case we miss anybody. We also cross-examine the different lists to make sure there's no duplicates and so forth, and we make sure we're catching everyone, and also emphasizing that partnership with the community, as Flo mentioned, is so important with our with IOP, of course, with the Department of Child and Family Services, with the Department of Probation as well. The student that I mentioned earlier that came in yesterday was referred to by his probation officer, who we've had a relationship with from the very beginning, for over 8 years now. So probation officers tend to send the students, social workers send the students all the time, and it's really important just to maintain that relationship, because these are the folks that are going to be telling you about these students sometimes while they're still in high school. So that gives you an opportunity to kind of help prep them for what's coming. And also our relationship with LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, has been so important as well in maintaining relationships with the counselors who work directly with students in care. So we provide campus tours for our seniors who are still in high school, and also we're actually doing a webinar for high school seniors through IOP with DCFS next week. So these relationships are so critical in getting those students before they actually apply to college while they're still in high school. So, and another thing that I'd like to mention lastly is creating a relationship with other special programs on campus too, because sometimes, as Alvaro mentioned a few minutes ago, that our students qualify for multiple programs oftentimes, and sometimes they'll make contact, let's say with the Moja, for example, or the Rainbow Pride Center, and they you know, they let their counselor know, oh, by the way, I was in foster care. And they say, oh, have you reached out to Guardian Scholars yet? And they're like, no, what's that? So then they'll bring students to us as well. So vice versa, we'll take students over to Umoja, to the Rainbow Pride Center, to the DRC, the Dream Resource Center. And we let other folks know that, you know, it's especially students know that it's okay for them to be part of multiple programs, and to really reap the benefits that all of these different programs have to offer. But I think collaboration is really key in making sure that we have as much outreach and inreach as possible, so that we're really casting a wide net.
And I really appreciate that comment. Dr. Nixon, or Dean Nixon, you unmuted, sorry.
Yes, I just wanted to add, kind of from an administrative perspective, is especially for new programs, but even existing programs, to consider hiring someone for outreach with a specialization in foster youth. It has been my experience, you know, since 2015, identifying students for NextUp is difficult. Even with all of these lists that everyone has described and all these partnerships, it is challenging. And just kind of reflecting upon the implementation, you know, 2015, 2016, it was hard. Even with all of these lists, it was still hard to recruit students. And for new programs, it will take time, but it does get easier. So, you know, just from a veteran who has done this before, getting started from the ground, it's going to be challenging. But if you do the work, you know, and building these collaborations over time, it will become very easy. But it is important to invest and to do the work in building these partnerships, because ultimately over time, because all of our staffing, you know, is limited, you know, to some extent. And so if you can have community partners do the referrals for you without you having to go and get every student, that is really going to help you be a more effective program. So I can't stress that enough. But something I would definitely consider doing is hiring someone with with expertise, or training someone to have expertise in the identification of current and former foster youth. It is a niche population. It takes a lot of time and effort. I think all of us can attest to this. Multiple, you're talking a half a dozen phone calls sometimes just to break through. Because remember, these are brand new students. They don't know who you are. So we talked a lot about trust earlier, but if you're trying to recruit a student, doesn't know who you are, who has had negative experiences, it's going to take a lot of time to even get that student in. So if programs, you know, have funding, if they have the opportunity to hire for someone for outreach, go for it. If it's full-time or even part-time, it's a worthwhile investment that will yield results in the future. And then something else I would like to add is really relying on the expertise of other community colleges in your area. That has been very critical, I will say, for our Region 7. In Region 7, we're very unique in that out of the 10 original districts, 2 of our colleges were the original pilot programs for CAFES at that time. And so we have worked collectively and intentionally together. There's no need to do this by yourself. Don't do this on an island. So please reach out to your region, reach out to your local colleges. Now being at City College, you know, there are a number of other colleges that are very close to us. So we have Trade Tech, we have East Los Angeles College. And so it's very important to build a community within your local supports. And then taking it a step further, our region, we have successfully done this twice, and we'll be doing it a third time in 2023, as we have had NextUp joint advisories. Well, we'll bring together all of the community colleges, you know, in our region. That does include Valley College. Alex has participated in these. Well, we'll bring together all NextUp programs, and at that time, even colleges that did not have NextUp Guardian Scholars, we invited them as well. So that was very inclusive. And we had a joint advisory where we would bring together all of these partners. We have been very successful in this model. I would encourage other regions to replicate this. It has been very effective in bringing all the stakeholders in one place. Oftentimes, the contacts that we have are also contacts for other colleges. So we wanted to be mindful not to be too taxing even on our contacts who are serving multiple schools. So if you can bring them all together and have a joint advisory like we have done in Region 7, I would, that is a best practice. And in 2023, we will continue this practice now that NextUp has expanded. All community colleges in our region will now have a NextUp program, so it will be even more impactful and even more powerful.
These are just amazing pieces of information. So thank you for bringing all those important topics and items up for consideration as folks are looking at how to expand that network for outreach, for inReach. And I consistently heard over and over again the importance of those relationships, and not only in terms of building those with external stakeholders and partners, but also don't underestimate the power and the value, right, of those internal campus-based relationships for that cross-referral and cross-segmental support. So thank you. One of our final questions, trying to be mindful of time, is looking at challenges. So we've looked at some of the strategies, the insights for successful integration and implementation within, and think all of your campuses have integrated your NextUp program within or in collaboration with EOP&S. There are different models that are right now under consideration when it comes to NextUp implementation for those programs that grew outside of an EOP&S partnership and who may remain outside of EOP&S but combine their foster youth support services. So wanting to take a moment, in terms of challenges at colleges with existing foster youth programs outside of EOP&S, things that maybe they might keep in mind or take into consideration as they integrate their NextUp funding. Anyone have thoughts on that?
The first thing that comes to mind is to be student-centered and keep those needs at the forefront of your conversations. Your question has the word challenge, and it can be challenging, just to be very transparent and honest. When you're bringing together, NextUp funding and Guardian Scholars funding, or whatever your funding streams are, it can be challenging, especially if programs were housed. And now colleges are talking about possibly reorganizing. That can be, it can trigger a lot of anxiety, with program personnel, because, you don't quite know what's going to happen. But even within that, it's just very important to be student-centered and think about, what is the best way in which we can serve students to bring everyone to the table. Because in some cases, it may be very challenging, and as a leader, being very aware of that. So, for those of you that will be in charge of implementing this, again, and being fully transparent and honest, it may be very challenging. But as a leader, just ensuring that you're aware of that and that you're sensitive, to the needs and concerns that staff and faculty may have. And allowing time and space for people to express that. And then, just being very careful, with folks, being very gentle with people. This is different. And whenever you're implementing change, it can, be very triggering. Even if it's good change, it can still be triggering. So just, being very mindful of leaders, and your leadership, to go about this with intentionality, plan. If you're merging programs, please plan, and be strategic, in that planning, so that we can all come together, to serve students effectively.
Speaking from a staff perspective, someone who's on the ground, right, the front lines, as these conversations were happening and as the programs were working to collaborate, what Dean Nikki mentioned is exactly spot on. What made the transition possible and what made it easier was that the college leadership was very transparent with us. We sat down amongst the Guardian Scholars and NextUp staff who, out of all transparency, probably haven't collaborated that much, before then. And we sat down as a team and we talked about this, and we talked about what we were feeling, what anxiety we had, right? And we were able to have honest conversations as professionals and as people who, have their hearts in this work, to really discuss what was going to happen and what we can do to collaborate, not for our sake, but for the students' sake, right? And being honest that it's going to affect the staff, but it really was, the difference really was, in my opinion, that our leaders and the administrators had these open conversations with us, and were able to answer questions, and were able to really be truthful about what was happening and what the overall grander vision of everything was, and why this was so important for us. So I would really encourage administrators out there that are watching this, as you're planning this, to let your staff be heard. Make sure that make sure that the staff have the agency and the ability to advocate for themselves, and to really just be open to having these honest conversations among everyone involved.
All beautifully said. I think we also experience the thing. I think that's something that one thing that I extra emphasize is all about the student. And it's, we all look at it. We're all here to serve the students. It's not, at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's not about whomever. It's really, truly about how can we get the student from the beginning to the finish line? What red tape do we need to rip off, right? All our policies, all of our procedures, we need to look and ask questions. Why is that there? Why is that there? We need to remove some of these things, or we need to, guide them. What are some things to guide our students better? And that's just one of the advice I would give. All of these questions, of where can we do, what can we do? It truly comes down to, let's map out the journeys, the student's journey map. Let's map that out. What is that experience like for them? Because if we are creating barriers, how can we fix that? What are some things that we can do to remove that barrier? And that's the bottom line of it. What is something that I'm doing that is creating a barrier for the student to get to the finish line? What is the next department doing that's creating that barrier? I mean, those are things that we all should really look at. At the end of the day, it's about the students. All of our policies, all of our procedures, all of our services should be about students. And that's all I got to say. But yes, spot on.
And I agree with all of you. In addition to what we found, some of the challenges is just some of the personal challenges that students face on a regular basis. So, when identifying that students are, dealing with not just academic obstacles, but also personal obstacles, we decided to implement sort of a case management model where we're doing constant check-ins to make sure that students are okay outside of the classroom, outside of our offices, because oftentimes one of the challenges was keeping students on track academically. They're not showing up to counseling appointments, they're getting dropped from classes because they're not showing up. So in adopting this case management model, we're able to kind of check in on students regularly, which is why it's so important to have that MSW intern, to have that unclassified paid intern as well, so that when they're here, they're constantly checking in on students like, hey, don't forget, you have a counseling session coming up, as well as EOPS, they do that too. The day before, you have a counseling session tomorrow, don't forget. So, just doing that constant check-in and just doing those wellness checks are so important. And I just want to encourage all of those colleges that are incorporating the NextUp program is, really understanding that the challenges our students have are not just academic. They have constant challenges with housing, with food insecurities, with transportation. We had a student come in yesterday who took 4 buses to get here, and y'all are familiar with that rain that was coming down yesterday. So he was like, I didn't have time to have breakfast, I came on the bus. So that's why for us, it's important to have a snack pantry, for example, so that, you know, when students are sitting in your office and they're hungry, we can offer them some trail mix or a granola bar, some water and things like that, because some of the challenges that students face oftentimes we're not familiar with unless we ask and have those constant check-ins. So I think having that case management model, that wraparound model is really important and has been able to give us better insight on how to better support our students when we understand some of their challenges outside of our campus.
Thank you. Such incredible. I'm always like amazed by all these like nuggets of wisdom, and again, really grateful that you are sharing all of this with, again, maybe new practitioners or folks who are working again to integrate their programs with NextUp. Any additional, this is really our last question, any additional thoughts? I know we've talked a lot about a lot of different topics, but if there's anything that you feel like we didn't mention, any additional insights or recommendations that you would like to share at this time before we come to a close, I just want to open the floor to folks and invite you to share any final thoughts.
You know, Alex's last point just reminded me of the and reflecting on the challenges of foster youth and really everyone, is a critical role of mental health. And within the NextUp program, making sure that you do have partnerships, you know, with various agencies that can provide behavioral health services to students. That is definitely a theme that I have seen in working with NextUp students, is the challenges that students are facing sometimes are mental health challenges, and not having the support that they needed when they were in care, and experiencing trauma, and how it shows up as adults, and how it's showing up in the classroom, or how it may show up in your center, or how it may show up in a counseling appointment. So kind of going back to training, training faculty and staff about that. The critical role of mental health and serving foster youth is critical. And as programs and administratively, making sure that you have, you know, partners and networks available to support students who are ready to heal. You know, as we do this work and as we guide students, you know, we want them to be whole. And we realize that students are people, and all of us, you know, are utilizing holistic approaches. And as we are helping students heal through various things, making sure that we have the resources and networks available to help them heal, even you know, mental health needs as well. So making sure that those partners are available to support you.
One other thing that I wanted to share was the importance of getting involved in some of the committees that have been developed around foster youth and higher ed. One of them, you know, being with JBay with the FICAP committee, which is led by Jessica Petros, is so important in, you know, getting the insight from various entities, you know, like probation, different legal agencies who help on the legal aspect of things. So being part of those committees, as well as the foster youth, the higher education consortium with Dr. Sarah Gomez over at Cal Poly Pomona. They have, I believe, monthly meetings as well. So, you know, reaching out to folks and getting involved in these types of committees is really helpful, and learning best practices, because, you know, even though we've been doing this for a number of years, it's always a learning process. We're always learning, we're always growing and evolving into the essentially the roles that we want to, you know, become, right? So I think that's so important. And also, you know, being able to, as some of you already mentioned, is keeping your work student centered, which is so important, to be able to provide the resources and facilities necessary for our students to develop to their fullest potential as they're transitioning to a four-year university and or the workforce. So those are, you know, a bit of recommendations that I have in terms of, you know, getting involved and really increasing that knowledge base. And one last thing I want to share is also creating awareness and training at your respective campus. One of the things that we've done here at LA Valley College is partner up with our professional development department, and we create a training every semester for faculty, staff, administration. We actually have one for administration specifically, so that we're addressing some of these nuances that our students, particularly with mental health, with basic needs that our students are experiencing that, don't typically come up in the classroom as a student is sharing with the professor, for example. So I think these trainings, campus-wide trainings, are so important, and also bringing that awareness during the month of May and Foster Care Awareness Month. Something we do is provide a training and also a celebration where we're able to not only acknowledge our students, but also celebrate their resilience and their tenacity. So those are just a bit of recommendation. And as y'all mentioned already, it's important to reach out, if not to us on this panel, to anyone else you feel can be a contributor to your knowledge and to your best practices moving forward with the NextUp program.
Just adding on, I think Alvaro mentioned this earlier, but having a common application, that was one of the barriers that our students was having this, complete an application that's just for EOPS, and then completing a separate application that's just for Guardian Scholars, and then another one for CalWorks, and so on and so forth. And so we here at Sierra College created what we call a common application, where students, regardless of which website they're on, if they're on the EOPS one or the Guardian Scholars one, that when they click on that link to apply, it's one application for all of those programs. And then, the background work happens in our office to where all of our staffs are trained to know what the eligibilities are for each of the programs. Again, I think everyone in this panel has mentioned about making sure that our students qualify for as many programs as possible and resources. That was one of the ways that we did that, is really obtaining one application from the student, and then our staff is trained to look at, okay, this student could qualify for NextUp. This definitely qualifies for CalWorks as well. And so then all of these programs come together and say, okay, how can we serve? You provide the book voucher, I'll provide something that, and so that way we're not duplicating resources. But that the student is no longer required to apply at multiple programs. It's just one single application. So if that could be implemented on your campus, amazing. And let us know how we can assist as well, for sure. I invite you all to tap in, and if you need any assistance or further questions.
Wonderful. Well, again, a deepest sense of gratitude to our panelists. I hope that as you're watching this webinar, that you have been able to walk away with definitely different segments or nuggets of information that you can directly apply into the implementation process. And with that, again, thank you for your time, and we wish you the best with your implementation. Please reach out as you continue to have questions, or maybe come upon additional areas that you would like additional information. It sounds like our panelists are ready and open to have folks reach out to them for additional questions, and to become that resource, right? Because again, as mentioned, we don't need to do this work alone. We are much a broader state network that is definitely invested in, willing, and supporting the expansion of services for our foster youth. And so with that, thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day.